Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com again. Welcome back to my video channel, and I apologize for my relatively long period of time away. I think it's been about a week and a half or 2 weeks, but I had a few personal reasons for being away, one of which was my daughter's daughter was born, and that was, a big thing with the family, of course, and being able to see her, etc. So that took up a little bit of my time, which was, I was happy. Happy. At any rate, it occurred to me after the last video series I did on the trump cards, right, the triumph cards of particularly Italy and France, that I completely neglected the Belgian and Swiss varieties and how they would have, or how they did evolve, and where they got their inspiration, right? And, I don't want to, I wanted to rectify that. After I did 1 or 2 videos, I realized, well, I'm leaving out the Swiss and Belgium, but it was such a huge undertaking that I figured I would just give them their own video. Now, again, we want to look at the map, right? We have Italy, where it is believed that the game of Triomphe originated, probably based on Petrarch's poem, on the same subject, and that the cards are reflective of some of the images evoked by that poem. So we have Italy here. We have France here. Notice how Milan and Marseille are relatively close to one another, both areas or regions in their own country that were particularly active card makers. Here we have Switzerland bordering on both, and Belgium up here, Brussels up here, which is bordering with the French. So they would have had more influence, one would think, with the French than the Italian. Switzerland, being influenced by both, right? So it's important to bear in mind that this was a card game, and that people, from different countries, soon adapted it to their own iconography, perhaps, their own understanding of what they were looking at when they were copying the cards. Okay, so to identify the decks that I'm using, before I forget, which I'm prone to do, I have them more or less in chronological sequence. I could be off a few years. Some of these decks, we're not exactly sure the date, but we have the Metelli, 1660, Bologna, Italy. We have the Tarot of Paris. Now, to represent it, I'm using the box, but I'm actually using the deck put out by the International Museum of Tarot in Italy, because these cards are larger, and when they did the job of restoration, they made it a little easier to understand what we're looking at. I do reference these two different decks in another video if you want to check them out. I do have a playlist where I compare these two decks. We have the Vieville, which and the Tarot of Paris probably coincides more or less with the Noblette, Noblette Tarot from 1650. Not exactly sure when this came out, but sometime around that same period of time. The Vieville, same thing. Maybe we're not exactly sure. Now, this deck of Jean-Claude Flournoy identifies it as 1650. So it's a contemporary of the Noblette. And I have the Civilixi version also, but I'm choosing to use the Flournoy because it photographs easier. And again, just like with the deck here, the restorers made it possible to see with greater clarity what it is that we're actually looking at. Then I have the Flemish Tarot, 1775. The Minchiati from 1806 or 1807, also Italian. And the Burdell, 1751, Switzerland. Now, I do want to point out that the Metelli and the Minchiati are not standard 78 card decks. Notice this is called a Tarotino, which means it's an abbreviated deck, so it would have had fewer cards. It is a tarot game, a version of the tarot game, but with fewer cards. However, it does have the Trump or Triumph cards. Minchiati is an extended version, right? So it has more cards. In this deck, it also includes, virtues, the elemental cards, like fire, land, the heavens, or the, air, and no, I don't have them properly situated here, but they have the, the virtues, and they have the, earthly elements, and then they have the signs of the zodiac, right? And this is a cool deck. The Minchiati Etruria is a cool deck to use for cartomancy, or, I use it for myself personally because I do like having these extra cards, But again, like the Metelli, it has the basic Triumph cards with the exception of the number 5 card. So they don't have beyond the Pope. They don't, excuse me, beyond the Emperor. They don't have a Pope card. Okay. So let's take a look at the concept of the Fool or the Madman across these 5 or 6 decks. Here we have the Metelli, a character kind of clothing amiss, right? He's got some type of device on a stick. Not quite sure with the modern eye what it is. This almost looks like a balloon, but we know it can't be a rubber balloon in Italy in 1660. But we do get clues from it with the Minchiati of 1806 or 1807, right? Here we have this, an individual with an accomplice, or, with others in the picture. This character is holding a similar looking device, so maybe it's some type of wind thing, I don't know, but this looks like some kind of clacker, so maybe that's what this was, some kind of, I don't know, I really don't know. I've read it described that they were, maybe some kind of musical thing. Here there's a child. Here, I don't know if this person is assisting this individual. I don't know. But it is, an Italian thing. It's, when we look at the Visconti Sforza decks, the madman really is, the fool rather, it really is kind of depicted as a madman. Someone who has feathers in his hair, which we do see here. We do see that still. In tattered clothing, but not like this. Maybe, maybe, I don't know. I've forgotten. And I probably should have reread and got up to date with what this represents. But, I read somewhere that they may have represented, noise-making devices, clearly traveling through because it's an outdoor setting. In the Tarot of Paris, we have what we, would call probably a court jester. He's got the staff of a court jester. His own head looks like the court jester. He's got his bells. He's wandering through. Maybe he's been exiled. In the Vieville, which is Swiss, we have the familiar image of an individual with a stick, with, a satchel of some type. He's got the bells. He's got maybe, donkey ears or something. Maybe these things are feathers. His staff does seem to have remnants of, a jester's staff. And we see the creature. Now, it's possible that whatever this thing was, right? And over here, whatever this thing was, at some point, maybe with different regions or countries, you know, reinterpreting what they saw, maybe at that point it became a satchel on a stick. I don't really know. But that's why it's really interesting to look at the cards, right? In chronological sequence and an understanding where the countries fall in relation to one another, you know, to see how they may have come to their understanding of these objects. In the Vandenboer, which is Flemish or from Brussels or Belgium, we have again, similar to the Vieville, a character with the introduction of an animal with a walking stick and a satchel. It's less obvious or clear if these are ears or feathers, right? And the Burdell 1751, Switzerland, we have a gentleman going in this direction with kind of the influence of all the things we've seen with the bells, you know, a jester's hat, a walking stick with a satchel, and the creature. Now, the magician, you know, what we call the magician. In the TDM, it's le battleur. In the Visconti Sforza, if you recall, I discussed how Cristina Dorsini of Il Menengello, she's Osvaldo Menengazi's, I think, stepdaughter, discusses how the table in front of which the Visconti Sforza magician stands might have been someone who was serving cheese at a noble event, because one of the objects on the table represented what historians would recognize as a particular type of cheese. And the reason why he would have been in nice clothes in the Visconti Sforza version may have been because he was presenting the cheese at a noble event, right? However, in other decks, the magician is represented in different ways. Now, it could be, and you know, and we've seen this in other decks, and we will see it in these decks, that the concept of something could be, you know, the same concept but represented by different images, right? So that, you know, that could be an explanation for it. Here in the Metelli of 1660, we have an individual surrounded by what would appear to be children, and he seems to be an entertainer, right? So maybe he's entertaining children, you know, at an event. Maybe the Visconti Sforza wasn't a cheese crafter, you know, serving cheese at a noble event. Maybe he was a magician. Maybe he was some type of entertainer performing for the nobility, which would explain his nice clothing. It's one of the cards, you know, the images of which we might never really completely understand, but I think in the context of looking at the cards in different countries, or, you know, we kind of get the idea that this guy was an entertainer of some sort. And in the Italian decks, you know, maybe one for its children. In this particular Italian deck, rather. In the Tarot of Paris, he kind of looks like a street hustler. Not really quite sure. You know, we have, you know, we have a collection of adult men. I don't see children. If you pause, I'll look and see what they have to say about this card. Okay, so in the book, it says that he's a juggler intent in his job of conjuring tricks, while in front of him a crowd of people flocks. So, you know, then he is, you know, like a street hustler in this deck, as he appears to be in the Vieville. He's got the tools of the trade of a street performer, right? He's outside, so it's clear that this, you know, he picks up and goes. as he is in the Vandenboer Flemish. And by the time we get to the Claude Burdell, you know, what we're accustomed to seeing in TDM. Now, the next 4 cards are interesting because they vary, you know. In the Italian decks, and remember, the Vitelli is a Bolognese deck. Ultimately, the Bolognese replaced in 1725, you know, the female pope, the empress, the emperor, and the male pope with the 4 Moors, right? And although this is before 1725, we can see that in Bologna, they started playing with who these people are. Now, we have not a female pope for number 2, but someone who is male, obviously, with the triple crown that does suggest papacy. The next card, ambiguous if it's male or female, but a younger individual with a secular globe, a person of authority. Again, an older individual with the globe, a person of secular authority. And then finally, with the 4th card in that stretch of 4 cards, we have another gentleman with reference to the papacy. So we have references to secular and spiritual authority. Now I'm going to lump these as 4, and I'm taking them off here. In the Tarot of Paris, we do have what they identify as a female pope, the empress, well, the man they identify as the emperor, and then the male pope with the keys to the kingdom, the triple tier crown, some type of creature here, peculiar looking thing. And, you know, if you do want to understand more of the imagery of the tarot, the French Tarot Paris, the book that comes with it from the Italian International Museum of Tarot is you know, as good a source as any. Okay, so for the Vieville, what do we have here for those 4 cards? We have the traditional 4 that we're accustomed to seeing. The female pope with her triple tier, clear reference to the papacy. And I've discussed who she might have been in the other videos in this playlist. The empress with the secular reference and her eagle and her secular crown. The emperor with the same kind of attributes, only being male. We do see him seated in the familiar position, right, with the crossed legs. We're not really actually sure what he's sitting on here, but he does appear to be seated. And then the Pope with the pilgrims and the benedictive gesture, the gesture of blessing. Now, with the Flemish Tarot, for whatever reasons, these 4 cards were altered as they were in, you know, the Bolognese. We have the Spanish Captain, quite a different message if you're using this deck for divination than you would use the, you know, as a female pope. We do have the Empress and the Emperor. And we have Bacchus in place of the Pope, which of course is a very different meaning or interpretation of the Pope. In fact, you might, you know, consider this like an anti-Pope. So for political reasons, these cards may have, that stretch of 4 cards may have changed. Now in the Minchiati, it's interesting because they go 2, 3, 4, and there isn't a 4th card. They 4 went it. So I believe they identify these gentlemen as, you know, different, like a grand I'll pause and tell you exactly who these three are. Okay, they identified them as the Grand Duke, the Emperor of the West, and the Emperor of the East, and there is no, religious character. So the Grand Duke and the Emperor of the East and West, or West and East. And then, of course, when we get to the Burdell, we have the female Pope. She's identified as such. The Empress, the Emperor, and the male Pope. So the secular characters have secular crowns. They have secular scepters, right? We do see the Emperor here in the familiar position, and he's got a chair here, whereas before in the Vieville it wasn't as clear. And the religious references are clear here with the triple crown, or, well, we don't know if that's a triple tiered crown. But it does look religious, obviously. They may have not been popes, maybe they were more accurately cardinals, who knows. And here we see the pilgrims as we did in the Vieville. But the pilgrims here, we're seeing the backs of their heads with their tonsured hair, rather than seeing them in profile. And the Pope not only is giving the sign of benediction or blessing, but he's also got reference to the stigmata. Okay, so the next card is the Lover's card, and here we have the concept of love being portrayed as Cupid, who is blindfolded, perhaps to show love is blind. He's got his bow and arrow, and he's got a flaming heart. In the Tarot of Paris, we're not really sure what's happening here. I don't know what's happening here, but we do know that they're does reference lovers because it's called such, and we have Cupid. And here we see, what we see in the TDM cards, where there's three individuals. Now, it's not clear who all these people are. Cupid is not blindfolded here. And we have three individuals in the Flemish, and we have three individuals in the Claude Burdell. So, who are these three individuals? Well, one could be the magistrate. Maybe one is officiating the event. If you recall in the Visconti Sforza decks, it was a reference to a betrothal or a marriage, right? There wasn't a third individual there, but the understanding was that it was commemorating the marriage of the people who commissioned the deck. So it could be that, the third individual is just representing the magistrate or the individual who is performing the ceremony. Some people believe that there is a choice being made. The gentleman is choosing between vice, who he really wants, and virtue, who would be a really good match. Okay, we have the Chariot. Now, in the Italian decks, I think it's kind of interesting. Oh, and I didn't show this lover card. And this, looks more like like a betrothal. I think betrothal actually means an engagement, right? Maybe he's asking for permission for her hand in marriage or something like that. In the Visconti Sforza, the charioteer was a female, in reference to Bianca, right? So in the Bologna deck, also of Italy, we do have a female. And in the Minchiati, the charioteer is also a woman. She's straddling, above two horses. In the Metelli, there are no horses. But it's the concept of what a chariot means, right? Victory. In the Tarot of Paris, we have the charioteer with an assistant who is, like, I guess, encouraging the swan or geese who are the creatures, which is very curious. In the Vieville, we have an image that we're accustomed to seeing, more closely related to TDM1. You'll notice the ruffled canopy in the Chariot. And these horses, if that's what they are, have human faces. In the Flemish, we just have a simple charioteer with one horse. I already discussed this one. And in the Burdell, 1751, we have, this TDM2 style with the gathered curtain of the canopy. And these are more horse-like looking creatures. So here we go, move on to justice. 1660 Metelli, we have the female figure representing justice with the scales of justice and the sword, which have become universal symbols for justice. Her scales, whether, intentionally, which I guess everything is intentional, unless it's not, right? But, they seem a little bit askew. Here, the scales of justice are most certainly askew, and we have two faces, right? We have two faces for justice, which is curious. We have this sword. In the Vieville, we have justice who looks us head on. Again, the scales of justice are tipped somewhat, and you could tell because it's tipped up top. She's got her sword. She appears to be winged. Now, those could be wings because justice could be considered a virtue. Fairness, right? In the Flemish, we have tipped scales. Again, she is not blindfolded, and she has her sword. And these, again, do appear to be wings. In the Minchiati Etruria, tip scales, no blindfold, woman, sword. And by the time we get to the Burdell of 1751 Switzerland, the wings have become chairback. The scales of justice are even, and we have the sword. So this could be reflective of how this country or this particular artist perceived of justice, right? Justice needs to see the truth. She's not blindfolded. She needs to be fair, even, because sometimes justice isn't always equal, right? Sometimes, what is fair isn't exactly equal, right? If somebody's a multi-trillionaire and you give them $100,000 fine, that's hardly equal, for maybe the damage they might have done to the environment or whatever corrupt thing they did, right? So their justice might be doled out a little unevenly to make it fair. We couldn't punish, a trillionaire in this with the same level of, dole out the same level of punishment to a trillionaire as you would to someone who's homeless or penniless, right? So justice isn't always equal, but it should be fair. Okay, now moving right along to the hermit. In the Italian Metelli, we have a lone individual. The word hermit comes from a Greek word similar, like ermite or something like that, who means a solitary figure. So we have a solitary figure in this rendition. He's got wings. He has some type of physical infirmity. He looks older with a white beard that doesn't match his hair color. Perhaps he's impoverished. He has no clothes. In the other Italian deck, the Minchiati of 150 years later, we still see the crutches. We have the reference of a stag, which I got into in, I think, the answer that someone had, a question in my other playlist regarding the hermit. We see the hourglass, right, with an arrow, the passage of time. So in the Italian decks, we have age, right, the passage of time with an hourglass. Now, at some point, did the hourglass get misunderstood and become a lantern? I don't know. In the Tarot of Paris, I think 1660-ish, so we're slightly around, it's a contemporary to the Metelli. We have a figure emerging from a tunnel, and we see the road that comes from the tunnel, right? We see him on that road. Right? He's got some type of, I don't even think, you know, when I referenced what that could be in the book, I don't even think anybody really knows what it is. Some type of jarred lid, or I don't know, lidded jar or whatever. I don't think anybody quite knows what's going on here. He does have a walking stick. He does have what appears to be a strand of something. Solitary figure. In the Vieville, he's an aged figure walking. This would have been a block print, so, you know, we see the number 11 rather than 9. If it had been printed, what we would have seen would have been, if you'll indulge me, because Flournoy does show us, right? If it had been imposed, you know, printed with a number 9, then the figure would have been going this way. The nice thing about the Flournoy deck is that it shows us, he provides 2 versions of the deck, right? And in the Flemish, again, an individual here, you know, he's not holding an hourglass or a lantern. It looks like a book. But again, he's older. And he's walking. He appears to be walking anyway. And then by 1751, the Claude Burdel, we have the image that we're more or less accustomed to seeing. The hourglass became a lantern. He's an aged gentleman. He's walking out of doors. He's got his walking stick. Okay, the Wheel of Fortune. Italian deck, we have Lady Fortuna, a cornucopia with money. Sometimes fate is on your side. Sometimes life is good, you know. It all depends on where you are on the wheel. And we have the Metelli, the Minchiati, where we're physically shown, you know, individuals in various stages, right? Has no reign, is on top of the world, is ascending, is descending. So, you know, we could say that they are different ways to express that concept, as are all these. Lady Fortuna, or, you know, being on the top, losing your power, no one represented on the bottom, and someone ascending. But you know, who knows how these, you know, images were understood, and they, you know, maybe something got lost in the translation, and it doesn't always appear as though, especially on the wheel, that every individual creature or what was represented on the wheel was, you know, literally understood to be how it was originally intended. And that's part of the charm, right? What we get is sometimes quite different from how it started. Like, you know, at a party when someone says bowl of cherries, and by the time you get to the end, they thought you said roll on the something, roll on the berries, you know. So that, you know, something gets lost in translation. Okay, here we have a column signifying strength in the 1660 Metelli, again in the Minchiati, Etruria, column for fortitude, strength, right? Clear classical, references to a column as a symbol of strength. And then the Visconti Sforza deck for marriage, for the lover card, there was a column between the two lovers, right? Symbolizing strength, the strength of their union. So this is like a classic representation of fortitude and strength. At some point we have the introduction of the lion, and the human commanding or overcoming the strength of the beast. In the Visconti Sforza, I believe the human was beating the beast. Okay, now the Hanged Man. As we discussed with the Visconti Sforza and the other cards, that I discussed in the other in this same playlist, but using the Italian and French cards, the traitor as the Hanged Man is as a person who is punished for the crime of treason or being a traitor, right? In the Metelli, 1660, the individual is, and when I read the literature, the individual is identified as a traitor, and he's being bludgeoned from behind. But he's still being recognized or identified as a traitor. So I don't know what kind of punishment that would have been for a traitor. There may have been other references, and maybe some people who saw this might have thought it was Isaac, who's was that biblical story where the father is willing to sacrifice his son, and that may have been what some people thought this was representing, which might have led to people thinking that the Hanged Man represents sacrifice in some way. I don't know. I've never read that. I'm just making that up in my own head as I go along, and I see cards and I kind of try to put things together with how they could have come to certain meanings. Here we have a man identified as the Hanged One. In the Vieville, properly, identified as number 12, which is by this time what it would have been identified as, but was it printed upside down? In which case, it would have been a different number, right? But this is the way it actually appears in the Vieville, with the number being the number that we understand to be correct as an individual not hanging, even though this does most certainly appear to be some type of gallows and some kind of thing connecting him to the gallows. But there are people who will argue with me that it was never intended to be a hanged person. But, I think it was. That's just me. Again, the Flemish deck, maybe a misunderstanding. Maybe they copied off of these guys, right? They understood the deck, the image to be like this. And so this came first and this came second, So maybe that's how they understood it to be, and not recognizing it as a hanged person at all. But the other Italian Minchiati, who, they are the ones, the Italians who understood their iconography. The Hanged Man was always a hanged man. Sometimes he had, a reference of money in his hands, could have been a biblical reference to Judas being punished for his crime. But in general, the could have been, in reference to his crime if he received money for being a traitor. But by 1751, the Burdell recognized it and understood it to be a hanged individual, and that's how it appears. Okay, so now we have death. Pretty universal, a skeleton. Interesting, like the hermit, he appears to have an hourglass in his hand and a scythe in the other. Death in his walking stick and his scythe as part of it. Same. And we see the remnants of human life. Not often or always identified by name. It may have just been because by putting the name in there, it cut off the space for the scythe. It may not have been easy to get the whole image in, right? If you had the name in, but some representations of death do have him labeled by name, whereas others don't. So I don't really know. Certainly, if you name something, you give it power. So not giving it a name, might have been a way not to give it power. But when we see death in a deck of tarot, we usually can identify him pretty easily. Okay, moving quite along, and I do thank you for persevering. I don't prefer to have long videos. I like to do them in bits and pieces, but if I did this in bits and pieces, it might take forever. So, Temperance 14. In the Metelli 1660, water or liquid from one vessel of one color to another vessel of another color. Could be representing, because the vessels are different, one substance turning into another substance or diluting the effects of one substance with another. Not quite sure where this substance leads. Okay, the devil. We have a real fire and brimstone type of devil. I mean, he even has his pitchfork. He's got horns. He's got his wings. Oh, yeah. And in the Minchiati, 150 years later, same kind of guy. Maybe not hell, fire, and brimstone, but he still has his, is that a trident, his pitchfork. He has what appears to be sparks of flame from him, snakes. And I guess this is a type of snake creature. He's winged, horned. In the Tarot of Paris, we see a similar type of representation. We also see the face and the belly. It's my understanding that a face and the belly, where do you feel your emotions, right? You feel them in the pit of your stomach. And, where do you feel lust? When you feel lust for someone, you feel it in the pit of your stomach or in your groin, So, and then we also, interestingly, have chains. Things that bind you, kind of keep you tethered to your emotions. Again, we have the belly face, low in the abdomen and on the knees. I read too that Masons considered, stonemasons, that the rock or the stone had a life to it, so it had like a face to it. And, they sometimes, I think, would put like a face to the rock, or think of it like as having a face. And so, again, the idea of emotions, you know, being the essence of what drives, you know, a card like this. And the Flemish, the Belgian deck, the face either in the groin or the pit of the stomach, and eyes all over the body, you know. And in the Burdell, we don't see the face in the Swiss deck by 1751, but it is kind of accentuated. And we have two individuals tethered or anchored to this individual, whereas we don't see that in the other cards that I've shown. Okay, fire. The Tower is, I discussed this with the other the other videos I did when I discussed the Tower, when I pulled this card out. This card reminds me of like somebody saying, may God strike me dead if I'm lying. And sure as heck, he's being struck down, right? I also often think of the Tower as vanity before the fall, right? You know, you get to the, you know, you're so egocentric, or you're so sure, or confident, or proud of yourself. At some point, you know, you're shot down. The other Italian deck, 150 years later, appears to be the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, right? Because they're exiting a structure. You know, they're exiting, and there does seem to be divine intervention. Now, it's really confusing to know what's happening in here, but this word is, I think, lightning, right? Or lightning or thunder, you know, a reference to lightning and thunder. But there's a lot of stuff going on in this card. Oh my gosh. You should read about it. Okay, here we have a tree, not a tower at all. And this is the Vieville, right? So we have a tree. I don't even see that it's being struck, but it must be. You know, or perhaps, you know, these things are reference to what's happening, obviously. It's very interesting, because it doesn't overtly appear as though the tree is being struck, but we do have the presence of these elements. But the Flemish make no bones about it. The tree is being struck by lightning and is caught on fire. And again, we have the goat kind of creatures at the bottom. So they share a source, right? And then by the time we get to the Burdell, we have the image that we're accustomed to seeing. And these things. Okay, now the star is another card where a concept was used to express, you know, a different image was used to express the concept of a star. I discussed in my other video in this series how this guy kind of became the hermit, but in the Metelli deck, he is the star card, right? He is walking with a lantern. He's got a stick. He's got stuff, but he's no mistake that he is walking in the darkness. He is walking at night. He is walking outside, and it's under the cover of the stars. So this was the star card of the Metelli deck. I wrote a blog article about it. Maybe some of you read it in my blog on tarotclarity.com, that this card eventually appeared to have morphed into the Hermit card that we're familiar with. But the image itself appears to have originated with the Metelli Bolognese deck as the card representing the star. Here we have an astronomer. You know, we see a device, you know, used for measuring. I think it's called a caliper, but I'm not positive. It's a type of scholar studying the stars. So an astrologer in those days would have been an astronomer. Again, with the Vieville, a scholar with the same instrument. Same with the Flemish or Belgium Tarot. Same with the Minchiati. He's got the same instrument in his hands. You know, and I'm wondering, well, this one more clearly looks like the moon. So let me pull the book again and see if they, which card do they have for the star? I may have missed it in pulling it out. Number 36. I'll pause and pull number 36 card. Okay, so this is curious. There is no 36 card, and this is the only card that remotely appears to be a card that references the star, right? And at first I thought, I didn't pull it as representing the star because I thought maybe it was the King of Cups, you know, but clearly this is the King of Cups. So this must be the star card, and it is not numbered 36 unless it's somewhere in the art, and I'm just not seeing it. But at any rate, this kind of looks like one of the Magi, you know, or someone who is just galloping through the night under the star. So this would have been the star card from the Minchiati. And then by the time of the Burdell, we have the TDM version of the, you know, Aquarius as representing the star card. And if you want to understand the connection between the Aquarius and the star card, you can see it in my other video in this playlist. The last one in the playlist with the Italian and French cards. I just don't want to get into it now because this video is already too long. It's probably going to hit an hour. Okay, the moon card. You know, we have the reference to Diana with her dog, the moon. This is the Metelli 1660. Here is the Minchiati Etruria with the gentleman. Again, a type of astronomer who in those days would have been an astrologer, the cycle of the year perhaps. And, you know, with his calipers observing the moon. Again, someone observing the moon, something happening something happening under the moon. Maybe pursuing a lover, I don't know, in a tower. I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on here, but whatever it is, it's going on under the moon. Okay, in the Vieville, something happening under moonlight, like a spinner, I'm not sure. I believe this has is a reference to thread, an activity happening in the evening under the star. I've forgotten. I used to know, but I have forgotten. And the same thing here. So they have they share a similarity in vision, you know, of depiction. A tree, the star, different number, but they both share the different number. And then, oh wait, did I screw up? Oh, I did. I screwed up. Here's the moon. Did I get them in? What the heck did I do? I screwed up. But anyway, hopefully you caught it and you understood. Here we have the TDM. By the time we get to the Claude Burdell Tarot, we have the image that we're accustomed to seeing. The two dogs, the sideway facing moon for TDM2, and the crustacean in the center. What did I do here? This is the moon. This is the star. I got that right. Huh. I'm not even sure how I screwed up, so please forgive me. Okay. Now we have the sun. All right, so 1660, Metelli, the sun, a reference to Apollo. Here we have lovers in the sun. It is the sun card. You know, two ways of depicting the same concept, you know. When Metelli did his, he decided that it would represent, he would represent the sun with the sun god, Apollo. When the Minchiatia Chariot deck came out, it was decided that it would be showing the glorious nature of daylight and sunshine with, you know, lovers in a garden. It's called the sun, so we know it's the sun. I forget what the reference is. I'll pause and read it and tell you. So yes, indeed, your eyes do not deceive you or me. That is a monkey apparently holding a mirror. And I don't even understand the explanation they're giving. What is above is like what is below. I don't know. I don't know if what they're seeing behind the female, it could simply be a reference to the goddess Juno, to whom the name of the month June is dedicated. So I think it's ambiguous that what the explanation in this book is ambiguous what's going on here. But whatever it is that's happening is happening in the broad daylight. We have the Vieville, you know, sun, person on a horse, which obviously Pamela Coleman Smith seems to have latched onto, right? We have it again. Remember, these two decks, the Vieville and the Flemish, really do favor one another. And in the Sun card of the Burdell, we have, you know, what we're accustomed to seeing in TDM. Okay, now, where are we? We're on the last two cards. Now, in the Italian decks, the World card was before the Judgment card. And for reasons I discussed in the other video, the last video of the other videos in this playlist. So here we have the Metelli and the Minchiatia Truria, you know, with references, you know, two images that reference the concept of Earth, right? Of the world. Here, Atlas or Hercules holding the world. Maybe, you know, referencing like the weight of his shoulders. That's how one way it could be interpreted, right? And here, you know, with the images, or curiously with, you know, the characters that we see that has later come to represent the earth in the four corners. But for most decks, the Judgment card came first. Clearly a reference to the Last Judgment, you know. In Italy, it was called the Angel card. You know, being held accountable for one's life. And it seems to be clearly represented in these decks. And the last card I already showed you, the World card of these other two decks. But here is for the, you know, for posterity, the Minchiati and the Metelli and the Minchiati angel cards. They're really angels, right? With a horn, announcing maybe the end or whatever. But okay, so here we have an interesting variety. With the Tarot of Paris, we have a figure on the world. In the Vieville, we have a figure that we're accustomed to seeing with the 4 creatures in the corners and an individual in a mandala. But here in the Flemish, although they tended to mimic or be similar to one another, here the world card is much more similar to the Tarot of Paris than it is to the Vieville, which is very interesting. And then, of course, when we get to the Claude Burdella 1751, we have a more similar image that we're used to seeing. So at any rate, I hope this video has been helpful or at least interesting to you in showing the Swiss, Flemish, Belgium tarot decks with 2 Italian and French, and a French deck as well. Until next time, friends, peace and stay well. And thank you very much for sticking with this video for an hour. That's a long time, and I do appreciate it. If you appreciate it, I would love a thumbs up, a subscription, or whatever. Sometimes I want to say things, in between videos, but I don't have enough subscribers to be able to do that. I think I have to have 1,000 subscribers in order to be able to put up little signs, to say, hey, look for my next video on this day or whatever, or hey, my daughter just had a baby and I'm not going to be around for a few days, that kind of thing. So subscriptions are real important. Until next time, friends, peace and stay well.